Welcome to Purpose Driven Sobriety. Thank you for joining Purpose Driven Sobriety. My name is Christine and I'm an alcoholic. Today's show host is Taylor McGaw. She's a realtor here in the Central Texas area, and Taylor just supports us in recovery, and she is just an amazing realtor that puts God and faith and customer service first. So if you're in the real estate market, check out Taylor McGaw on Facebook for sure. She's a realtor here in Waco, Texas. So today we have a guest, Mr. Matt F. And Matt, do you practice anonymity, or may I use your name?
No, you can use my name.
Okay, Matt Fisher. Well, and on the show, you know, Matt, what we do is we just simply share our experience, strength, and hope, with the person who still suffers. We try to keep this show as simple and authentic as possible. We just share what it was like, what happened, and what we're like now. We're trying to recover out loud. So I met Matt in one of the, and I talk about this, it seems like every show, because I've interviewed people from just all around the country now. Thank you, God, for that. That are willing to share their experience, strength, and hope with each other. But we met in one of the online Facebook recovery groups, and there's great recovery, support in those things. You just like with any meeting, you want to be particular as far as go in, see if it fits. In the interactions, there's one or two of them that are pretty controversial or combative, and it's just nobody needs that kind of shit. So just check around and visit the the different recovery pages. It's a good resource. So Matt, thank you for taking the time to join me. I know you've got some stuff going on in your life right now, and I just appreciate your willingness to sit down and tell me your story. So I'm gonna just leave it to you. I'll probably ask you some questions if it's appropriate, but other than that, just tell me what it was like, what happened, and what you're like now.
Right. So I'm Matt Fisher, alcoholic drug addict.
Hey, Matt.
My story is rather complicated. It's kind of hard to tell because you don't know what you don't know until you do, and as recovery progresses, more will be revealed. And so for me, I'll just start out with the basics, in the beginning or whatever. I'm 56 years old, born in 1966, rural Missouri. Grew up, I have a fairly normal family. I'm the youngest of three siblings, two older sisters. My parents were married 51 years, and my mom passed away or whatever. There was drinking in the home or whatever, just kind of the casual weekend bashes or whatever. And I don't know, when I was 8 years old, so really my story starts with trauma.
Mm-hmm.
And I'll make some important distinctions as we get further along.
Okay.
When I was 8, my mom tried to commit suicide, and I was home alone. I was home alone with her, and figured out what was going on. And we actually lived in St. Louis at the time, and so I ran to my uncle's to get my dad. This was in a day and age before 911. And so, I'm running like 15 blocks in the city of St. Louis to go get my dad at my uncle's. He survived, went on to the hospital or whatever. She was hospitalized for quite some time. And, when you're a kid, you just don't know what's normal, what's not normal.
Sure.
Right. And so this was just an event that happened, and I happened to be there and saved her life. And, as we kind of moved on from that, our family, my two older sisters began to act out and kind of rebel or whatever. And I remember my mom and dad went out one night to a party or whatever. They were going out for the night on Friday night. So my two older sisters wanted to go out as well, and my mom said, well, you have to take your little brother with you, or whatever. So I ended up at a party with my sisters or whatever, and we're just kind of hanging out or whatever. And, um, they're passing around the funny little cigarette or whatever. And I'm like, hey, I want some, and they're like, no, you're 9. And I'm like, I'm gonna tell, I'll tell mom. And they're like, okay, so they give me the joint. I don't really, I don't really remember, being high or anything, feeling anything as a result of
Mm-hmm.
smoking marijuana the first time. And I hear that's a common experience. But my mom could tell when we got home and my mom and dad got back home, my mom was livid. She could tell. And so that was my first experience smoking pot, 9 years old. And so we moved from St. Louis to rural Illinois in 78. And um, I took my first drink at about 13 years of age. My first real drink was, outside of the home or whatever.
Mm-hmm.
I'd sipped on beers or, you know, here, there, and yonder prior to that, but like the first drinking experience outside of the home was I was 13 years old and I was with some friends. We were driving around in a car, and I remember it like it was yesterday. I drank 3 split malt liquor beers and
Wow.
got violently sick.
Oh, I bet.
Um, and I remember the next day I got a hold of my buddy and I said, "Hey, if we're gonna do this, I'm gonna have to practice because I'm just not any good at this, right?" And so, here we go, right? And by age 13, 14, or whatever, I'm off and running. I'm smoking pot every day, drinking when I can or whatever. My sisters, they're pretty much out of control at that point or whatever, being with the wrong men and just everything. Um, so my oldest sister got into a relationship with a guy that she shouldn't have got into a relationship with. Ended up moving to Indiana with him, and he was beating on her, abusing her physically.
Mm.
And she called my dad to come get her. And this guy was notoriously violent and had a really bad reputation in our community. And so my dad, when he went to get her, he took a handgun with him, just in case. And what ended up happening was, um, the guy went after my dad when he got there to get my sister. And there ended up being an altercation in which this guy ended up being shot and killed. And
Mm.
so, um, my dad was arrested on first-degree murder charges there in Indiana.
Oh, wow.
Um, and so, you know,
And so
ultimately
you were about 13. You were about 13 when that happened?
I was a little bit younger. I was probably 11 or 12 when that happened.
Wow.
So I mean, I had the issue with my mom at 8, the issue with my dad at 11 or whatever.
Right.
And like he ultimately he made bail. We got him bailed out. He went to trial. He was acquitted at trial. It was deemed self-defense or whatever. But the damage was done. You know what I mean? Like
Oh,
we lived
sure.
in a small we lived in a small community, and everybody was calling my dad a murderer. Like it was unreal. And so by the age of 14, 15, I was skipping school. Like I didn't want to go to school anymore. I stuck around school long enough to graduate with a driver's license at age 16. And then, my drinking and drug use pretty much just spiraled out of control. I started having legal troubles at a young age. For petty stuff, I was, shoplifting, truancy kinds of things. Um, I don't know. And then, my drinking and drugging just spiraled out of control. And really, over the years, um, like I was, if I had to put an age to it, I was probably chronic like 21 or so. And so, um, and that was about the age that I met my first wife, at about 21. we got together, and we moved to Kentucky. And I didn't know this at the time, but we moved, yeah, from I was in St. Louis at the time when I met her, and moved to Kentucky or whatever, and got down there and was like, okay, I'm going to head to the liquor store or whatever. And then I realized it's dry county.
Oh boy.
And
That's
I
the
come back home
worst.
and I'm like, why didn't you tell me? She's like, you would have never came down here if you would have known it was dry
Wow.
county. And I'm like, do you realize how much gas money we're going to spend, driving, because it's like, and I don't know if you know what it's like to protect your supply or make sure that you always have enough or
Right.
whatever.
Oh
So
yeah.
like when you're in that situation or whatever, it's like, okay, I'm not just going down there to buy a case of beer. I'm going down there to fill the trunk up now,
Exactly.
and like we've got cases of beer stacked in the closet.
Stock
You know,
up. Yep.
it was it was dumb, and I had my first child was born of that relationship back in 1993. Um, the only child of that relationship. Her and I ended up divorcing in '97, and through the years with her, I mean, I not only was it just drinking, it was drinking, smoking pot, using cocaine, pills, methamphetamine, whatever.
Right.
By that point, I was pretty much unemployable. I'd had numerous odd jobs here, there, and yonder. Couldn't really get along with people. I had issues, had issues with, um, kind of fitting in with anybody or going along with any
Mhm.
set rules or schedule or um, and so we divorced in '97, and I continued, now that we were divorced or whatever, um, and the end of that relationship just devastated me, which is really ironic to think back on because man, I was not putting anything into that relationship other than heartache and damage,
Right.
you know,
That's what we
and
do.
taking everything out of it. Uh, and then for, me to be so arrogant about being, so heartbroken, when really I'd done this to myself,
Mhm.
And so about the year 2000, I met this other girl, and she was, by that point, I had been. Let me back up a little bit. When I was 19, I tried to commit suicide. There was an issue between my dad and I. We got into an argument or whatever, and he threw a can of beer at my head or whatever, and I ended up trying to commit suicide. Well, when I woke up, I ended up in the hospital there in St. Louis. I ended up in a dual diagnosis unit there at Lutheran Hospital in St.
Mm.
Louis, Missouri, and I was exposed to Alcoholics Anonymous at the age of 19 years old. I went to my first AA meeting there at that hospital or whatever. Um, then again in '97, right before we divorced, about 6 months prior to the divorce, I went into treatment to try and get sober and went through a 30-day residential program and then into a halfway program at that point. And the God honesty part of it was that I was trying to save my marriage.
Right.
I wasn't necessarily trying to be sober. I was trying to save my marriage. And
Mhm.
so when the divorce was finalized, like I left halfway and, proceeded to do what I wanted to do. And that was pretty much just full on 110% the party, and just chaotic, like absolute chaos. Um, and so, in about a year after I was in treatment and after at that point in my life, I was living in a motel. I was driving a truck for a living, if you can imagine that. Um, about a year after I was, out of treatment or whatever, I had drank the way that I wanted to drink, unsupervised and uncontrolled, long enough that I realized that I probably ought to do something. I probably ought to get some help. And I tried to go back into treatment um, in Illinois where I went originally. And unfortunately, the treatment center had caught on fire.
Oh
And
my.
so they were not paying people. Um, so in the meantime, I met this other lady, like, so, it's to my way of thinking, it was the next best thing, like he can fix me or whatever I thought I was going to get out of it.
Mhm.
And so we were together for about 7 years, and I ended up about 2002. Um, she got pregnant with what would be my middle child, Michael, and I'd felt a great deal of shame, guilt, and remorse about how badly I was failing my oldest son as a father. Right? I mean, it gnawed away at me. It really did. And so when she got pregnant or whatever, I was looking at her, and it was just this conviction of, oh my God, I'm gonna do it again. I'm gonna bring another kid into this world,
Right.
you know, and be just this major piece of shit,
Mhm.
never gonna be there or whatever. And so that was a moment of clarity for me. I decided then and there that that was unacceptable to me, and I didn't know how I was going to get out of the lifestyle because by that point, I was, I had been unemployable, prior to that, but by that point, I truly was unemployable.
Right.
Had a bunch of misdemeanor criminal charges, just stupid stuff, criminal damage to property and possession of paraphernalia, just, like 20 misdemeanors. Had finally caught a couple of felonies, actually went to prison in the state of Illinois for like 10 months in the year 2000.
Mhm.
Um, and, got out and went right back to doing what I was doing or whatever. Like there was really no consequence for me. I just, took me a long time to be able to say this, to kind of put words to how I felt and how I lived. But for the longest time, I didn't have a problem with my problem.
Right.
Um, I don't know if that makes any sense to
Mhm.
anybody else or not, but that's how I felt about it. Is I didn't have a problem with my problem until that second pregnancy came along, and things started to change for me. I didn't know how I was going to pull this off. As far as, I mean, we're talking about, for somebody like me coming out of chronic, years of chronic,
Use.
decades
Yeah.
of chronic. My whole lifestyle was centered on that, and so it wasn't just one thing that I had to change. It was literally everything, And so I just kind of started dipping away. Went back to treatment in like 2004. Um, Stayed sober for about a year. Had a really great year. Had a great sponsor.
Mhm.
Um, the littlest thing happened and it set me off, and I ended up relapsing in 2004.
Mm.
And so, um, I kept trying to kind of plugging away at sobriety from like 2004 to 2007. I, was in and out, back and forth, had, had a drawer full of 24-hour coins, just couldn't fit any time together.
Sure.
Wanting to want it is what my sponsor said. You want to want it, but you're just not 100% convinced.
Right.
And then in 2007, this girl that I was with, her and I got into it, and he kicked me out, and I had to call my dad. And I'm like, hey, can you come give me a ride? And he's like, yeah, he didn't ask any questions or whatever. And so he pulls up in front of this girl's house, and here I am with my IGA suitcases and everything I own, throwing it in the back of his Tahoe. And he's like, where are we going? And I'm like, to your house. And he's like, you got to get past your mom, right? And so let me back up in the story a little bit about my dad. My dad is also an alcoholic, and I can say that. I can say that about him because he was a member of Alcoholics Anonymous for a number of years. He did ultimately end up getting sober. My mom was also an Al-Anon, and so over the years, whatever, dealing with my parents, um, like they wouldn't help me unless I would go to meetings where, like there was always conditions on them and me.
Right.
And so when I showed up on her doorstep in 2007, um, she just looked at me and let me in. She must have seen something, or sensed something about it was serious, and I wasn't joking.
So they were
Um,
working their programs.
yeah,
Gotcha.
yeah. Um, and so I called December 7th of 2007 my original sobriety date. It's not my final sobriety date. I went back out after that, but I was standing on her porch, and the messaging that I was getting in that moment of clarity was, it's not about me anymore. Um, and 4 days later, my youngest son ended up in ICU on life support, um, there in Illinois or whatever, from a near drowning incident.
Oh my.
And and I'm standing there in the hospital going, and it's like clear as day. It's like I understand, every nerve in my body screaming I'm 4 days sober or whatever. But it's like, this is your purpose. This is why you're here. Like,
Mm-hmm.
it's not about you anymore. And um, so that started a progress of recovery for me. Um, I got about I got sober in 2007. Got about 11 months and was terrified because I'd never been sober that long before. And I was fortunate enough that I didn't have a license. I had gotten a DUI and I needed a license, because I had a job and I had some DUI counseling that I had to do. And so I went back to the treatment center and said, okay, I need to do some outpatient DUI counseling. And they brought me in and did my evaluation and all that stuff. And I met with their therapist or whatever. And she was a nice older lady, and I just spilled the beans. I said, man, I'm here to do, 125 hours of DUI counseling. I said, really, I'm 11 months sober and I'm scared shitless because I've never been sober
Mm-hmm.
before this long. And um, I told her, I said, I know that you have to do, like prevention and education and all this stuff. I said, but we could just talk about, me staying sober, as we go or whatever, that would probably be the bigger deal. I said, I know not to drink and drive.
Right.
It doesn't take a rocket scientist to figure that out. Um, I think the key to not, the key to DUI prevention for me is not drinking,
Right.
And so she went along with that, and it was, I had, I had a great sponsor at the time. I had actually two guys that were close to me that were sponsoring me. One lived about 3 blocks up the road, and then the other one, 10 miles down the road. But we were a pretty tight group. Went through the steps with them. Um, I had, and for whatever reason, my mom and dad, in the year 2000, my mom and dad sold me the home that they lived in. They co-signed a loan for me to buy the house that they lived in, and they bought a different house. And so by about 2001 or whatever, I'm like, I just left. You know what I mean? Like I can't pay the bills, I can't do nothing or whatever. They rented it out, and so I had this home that I wasn't living in, that I wasn't paying for. And about 2008 or so, my mom and dad were talking about filing bankruptcy, and I was living with them for that first year
Mm-hmm.
or so, and they were talking about filing bankruptcy, and that house was included in the bankruptcy. And I was thinking, I was like, well, if they file bankruptcy on the house, then the bank's going to sue me because I'm the original loan holder on that property, right? And like, it occurs to me that I can either pay for a house I live in, or I can pay for a house I don't live in, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so I looked at my mom and dad and I said, I'm going back down to Washington Street and I'm going to go back and take over that loan and live there in that house. And they just looked at me like with shocked surprise. And I had to go to the bank and I had to make a bunch of amends and straighten a bunch of financial stuff out. And like, kind of a big deal. And so I started living back in that house. And that's where I stayed. And there was a lady, I met people on the internet. I've always been part of internet recovery, whether it's chat rooms or Zoom meetings or whatever, because there's just been points in time where, for whatever reason, I couldn't get around or couldn't get away, and
Sure.
it's always kind of filled the need for me. And I met a lady a number of years ago down in Alabama, Georgia, wherever she was originally from. And because when I first got sober, in 2007, I had a huge identity crisis. I had been drinking and drugging so long that I didn't even know who I was.
Oh, I totally understand that. Mm-hmm.
And so I was talking to her about it, and she says, "We go back to what we know." And I said, well, "What the hell is that supposed to mean?" And in her infinite wisdom, she shut up and never said another word, and let me define that for myself. And,
Right.
And I don't know, my 3 boys had come one weekend, down to my house or whatever, and I had made a big pot of beef noodles, mashed potatoes, and just all this big huge meal, and we were all sitting there eating it or whatever, and it just kind of dawned on me that like this was one of the things of we go back to what we know. Like it was just this big, family gathering at the table with all of us eating and just, visiting with each other and having a good time.
Mm-hmm.
That was one of the aspects of, the things that I had been taught, that I kind of carried forward. I didn't understand. It didn't even dawn on me. I didn't comprehend that there may be a darker aspect to things we go back to what we know. And if
Right.
that happens to be trauma dysfunction, then so be it, So I don't know, 2010 or so, my mom was terminally ill, goes into the hospital, and she ultimately ends up passing away in February 2010. My mom and I were very close, She had worked a long time. She worked a long time to try and undo some of the damage of what originally happened all those years ago. She never come straight out and looked at anybody and said, here's what happened, here's what needs to happen, this is what I want you to do.
Mm-hmm.
She was always that person that led by example and never said a word, right? And when all these years now, when I look back on how things shook out or whatever, my mom absolutely did the best that she possibly could to redeem herself for those actions all those years ago.
Right.
And was there in every conceivable way. I held her hand as she took her last breath and she passed away. It was about 2 years sober. She was buried with my coin. And I also met a lady. A lady came back into my life at that point that I had known when I went to school. We had known each other since we were about 16.
Oh, wow.
And so we kind of got together, and I don't know. There was a lot going on at that time. I kind of back up here. The second job that I had in recovery, I really absolutely loved, and so this was about a year before my mom passed away. This job laid me off, right? And I was livid, right? I mean, I was just devastated that I had been laid off. My sponsor took me to the unemployment office. That I didn't have a license, so I called him and I'm like, they're laying me off. And he's like, okay, I'll come get you. I get in the car and I'm just wah 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 wah. It's all about me, and he's driving me to the unemployment office or whatever. So I sign up for unemployment. I go home and I'm bitching and complaining for like 3 months straight about this shitty deal. And when I look back on my behavior now, I really kind of adopted a fuck it attitude. I don't think I had the courage to go drink, you know what I mean, to like just overtly go out and drink or
Right.
whatever. But I think there was enough toxic, bad behavior in me to kind of dance with the devil on the peripheral of, some really questionable behaviors. And so when I got into the relationship with this lady, and I won't go into details about that, but it was not honest. She was with somebody else when we met up, and then we met up.
Sure.
So basically, she left one person to be with me, and we ultimately, stayed together about 10 years. I mean, things kind of just unfolded with my family, with my dad and my sisters in 2018. So there was a blow up between my dad and I. Let me back up. I apologize. Um, Early recovery, about 2009, 2010, I was having all these. I'd never been sober before that long, and so what I was thinking and experiencing, as I read the book of Alcoholics Anonymous, I was trying my best to work through the steps and, address everything that was going on with me. And what was going on with me is I was having a lot of fear, a lot of irrational fear, a lot of anxiety, a lot of insomnia, um, kind of a sense of impending doom type thing or
Mhm.
whatever. And, for whatever reason, I had a job, and, I had to go to work. I couldn't lay in bed all night and, worry or whatever. And so I ended up going to my family doctor who put me on Ativan for sleep.
Mm.
And so, her and I together, I don't know, 2012 or so, things are going bad with my children's mom. She's also got a substance abuse issue, and you know, um, things go from bad to worse, and to worse, he can't take care of the boys or whatever, and it's looking like I'm gonna have to go after custody of them. And so in 2013, 2014, I did. Um, got custody of my two youngest children, and here was, and at this point in time, I still owed my first wife a significant amount of child support, back child support, for my oldest son, and she was not very happy with me um, at that point, and so I was obviously having to pay her money, and like just everything was a mess. I ended up with a lien on my house for back child support for my oldest. Had a lot of debt from that. He turned me in for basically he turned me in for the back child support or whatever, a big chunk of money, and oh my God, what am I gonna do? And it was just like anything else. It was one step at a time. Um, so the Ativan, it wasn't just a 6 week thing and they discontinued it. It was they left me on it. And what ended up happening was over time I had to end up like I would sleep 3 or 4 hours maybe at night, and then I would wake up and I would have to take more to go back to sleep.
Mhm.
And so, and I was going back to the doctor and telling him, what was going on, and he just gave me more of a prescription in order to do that. And so by about 2015, 2016, it's clear to me that I'm addicted to Ativan, for sleep. And, if I take some, go to sleep, and then I wake up in the middle of the night and have to take more to see the same effect. I mean, that's pretty much
Right.
kind of a classic definition of, what addiction is,
Mhm.
or addictive behaviors.
Sure.
Um, And so I'm talking to people and talking to my sponsors and, the meetings, and, I've just got this big, huge spiritual disconnect. That's what I felt at first was like, the separation.
Mhm.
Um, and so, by that point, I had, officially announced that I had technically relapsed on prescription medication.
Right.
didn't know what to do. Um, I was open about that admission. I didn't hide it from people, but I did quit showing up at meetings. I didn't really want to talk about it because, here I am. I'm married. I got, kids in the house. Like life is pretty good for me. Um, my relapse wasn't like I just fell off the deep end and went
Sure.
straight to hell. You know what I mean?
Right.
It was a prescription medication and a thinking problem relapse.
Well, but
Spirituality.
there's still that when you know that it's when you know that it is a relapse, there is shame that starts oozing in that gets you to to stay away from the solution. I get that too. I mean, because you just there's shame keeps you from the meetings, keeps you from calling that sponsor. When there's been a relapse.
The other thing, you wouldn't talk about the shame or whatever. There were things that were going on in my marriage that I did not want to discuss with other people.
Right.
Um, the level of dysfunction in my third marriage um, was by 2013, 2014, 2015. Like I would talk to my sponsor about it. We would swap, stuff back and forth about our relationships or whatever. But it was clear to me that a choice was going to have to be made. It was going to be either or, not both.
Mm.
Like both couldn't coexist because there was a lot of dishonesty and just,
Sure.
So I'm to a point in my life where I don't want to condemn anybody or badmouth anybody or whatever. We all have our crosses to bear. We all have our own unique set of circumstances and
Mm-hmm.
characteristics that make us who we are. We're just fortunate enough to have a program that blesses us with a method of
Solution.
addressing our
Right.
specific situations. And no matter how much we wish that other people would choose the life that we live, or even a spiritual life at best, just self improvement or whatever, that's a pipe dream, on our own.
Mm-hmm.
Like we,
Mm-hmm.
you know, we can, we can attract, we can't promote, and so yeah. Let me get back on task here. By about 2015 or my dad asked me to be the executor of the state and power of attorney and all that. Him and my oldest sister had gotten into it, um, and so he wanted to change his will. I'm like, yeah, that's cool, whatever. Um, well, when my mom passed away, my dad drank again. Um, my dad started drinking again after my mom passed away,
Mm.
and it about killed him. I mean, they were together, 51 years.
Wow.
So when he passed away or whatever, he was just lost. I mean, um, he just about didn't survive that, to be quite honest with you. And then ultimately he regrouped or whatever, but he didn't go back. He didn't go back to AA. He didn't go back into recovery or
Right.
whatever. So here I am tasked with this responsibility for my father, and me being the self-centered, egotistical person that I am, I'm just truly honored to have been chosen. Um, I feel like it's a huge ego stroke for me for him to ask me to do that. Well, the problem is my dad pretty much does what he wants, and nobody's going to really tell him what to do. So
Mm-hmm.
you can ask somebody to do those things for you, but if you're not cooperating with or have any intentions of going along with what you've written down, then it's all pie in the sky at that point. It's more of a manipulation than it is um, anything legitimate. And so in 2018, things kind of hit the fan between him and I. He was having some issues with his house. Things were falling apart. He wasn't taking care of it, and um, we got into it because it was like, what are you doing? Like, um, and he got really mad at me, got, super angry and disowned me. Told me to get out of his house and never come back and all that. And so I went back home and, the thing about my dad is, I've never really seen him that angry or whatever. And so when I went back home, I knew that he was serious or whatever. He called the sheriff's department and had a no trespassing order, placed on me or whatever, so I could come to his house
Mm-hmm.
or whatever. And so I sat there for like the next year and just kind of grieved, what had transpired, pretty much like the loss of my father at that point, because um, I didn't know that the relationship could be salvaged, because he was that adamant. I mean, he said some things that were just beyond
Mm-hmm.
comprehension to me. Um, and so I began a period of time of deep reflection and soul searching. And so I was, sitting in my home, with my kids and my wife or whatever, thinking about what transpired with my dad and just how abnormal all this is, like this is not what normal people do. And then it kind of crept into me that this is all just so dysfunctional. It's not even funny, right? And that was kind of the first revelation that I had about it. And I started doing some digging. I started doing some research and started looking into ACA, adult children of alcoholics,
Mm-hmm.
and did a couple of Zoom meetings and was reading their literature or whatever. And so like the revelations for me came pretty quickly within a year or so. It dawned on me that I came to the conclusion that I did in fact have the trauma, and the symptoms that I was experiencing in early recovery were, to the best that I could account, were like classic PTSD symptoms.
Sure.
Um, and that my biological family, my dad and my sisters were highly dysfunctional, and so with that being said, it was kind of like, oh my gosh, like, and I wasn't really working on their inventory. I was working more online or whatever, and it wasn't long before I looked at the relationship with my wife and I knew that, you know, um, this was not good. This was not going to work out probably for me, because I've been making decisions and living my life in such a way that was absolutely putting me in harm's way, you know.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and so one of the very first things I did was I tried to get, and I did try to get providers to help me discontinue the Ativan over the years, and all of them refused. And so in 2020, I tried to get the hospital to do a medical detox on me for the Ativan, and they refused. Um, and so I drank and presented to the emergency room for alcohol intoxication or an alcohol detox. And so I went through detox that way, in the hospital, to get off the Ativan in 2020. And then um, I didn't go back to the meetings of recovery right away. I took about coming off benzodiazepines after about 11 years on them. I was, for all intents and purposes, I had a nervous breakdown. I was jelly, I
Mm-hmm.
was non-functioning, and credit to Michelle, my wife, for taking care of me and the boys during that period of time when she didn't have to.
Sure.
Um, and so it took about a year to get somewhat functional. I went back to AA in April of 2020. No, March 22nd of 21 is my sobriety date. That's what I claimed.
Mm-hmm.
And she backed up and left in April.
That happens.
um, it happens, and here again, I'm just absolutely devastated.
Mm-hmm.
You know, I don't know what it is about me and relationships, but you know, I find these people and I put all this stuff on them, and then yeah, um, you know, we find, depending on what we're, doing and what we're after, we find like-minded people, and so that was really hard. I was again in early recovery, but with some experience, facing the end of a relationship. Didn't really have my dad or anybody, my sister, didn't really talk to either one of them.
Mm-hmm.
So it was really rough. And then in December of 2021, I decided to sell my house and move to Indiana. My oldest son lives in Indiana. Ultimately, I did pay Stan, his mother, all that child support that I owed her.
Good.
Got all that, got all my financials are done. Like I didn't, there was the amends that I picked up, the new step work or whatever is based on, pretty much the last 10 years or whatever of that relationship, that marriage, and the people involved, my dad and my sister. So where we lived in rural Illinois, I have a disabled son. My middle child is disabled, and so there's just not a whole lot of help and resources in rural Illinois for a kid like him. And so when the opportunity came up, when he left or whatever, we're divorcing, I started thinking about, and I had thought about this before, about moving closer to my son. And so opportunity and circumstances kind of came together. Indiana has like a wonderful state for somebody like my son. But the upside of that is I didn't know before I moved here that it's also a wonderful state for somebody like me, because I had been to some meetings in like Terre Haute, Indiana, and I knew they had a big recovery community. I didn't actually move to Terre Haute. I moved to a town called Clinton, Indiana, which was about 15 miles north. I moved to this town of Clinton. I knew they had a meeting, but I couldn't find it anywhere on the website. Like the website was down, and so I just moved sight unseen into this without going to a meeting. And I got here, and I couldn't have walked into a better circumstance if I tried, because like even in Illinois, like mental health providers, like even trying to get diagnosed for PTSD or addressing any of that stuff, there was no available providers. They were far and few between.
Right.
And when you get over here, there's funding out the wazoo for this, right? And you have treatment centers everywhere. You have mental health providers everywhere. And so we moved here, and I immediately began engaging in like the local AA group, get involved in my home group or whatever, and I'm an intergroup rep for Clinton, Indiana. And then got my kids in therapy, and I started going to therapy or whatever, and come to understand, I have a therapist that understands the dynamics of what's going on, what I've been through,
right,
or whatever, to get the PTSD diagnosis, and we're working on that. And so, kind of the biggest part of my story is oftentimes when we're in the circle of the meetings or whatever, we will, I said this in a meeting. I said I didn't have a problem with my problem, and another guy with not a whole lot of time popped up and said, "Man, I really like that. That really kind of fit, where I was coming from." And I walked out of the meeting, and I thought, man, I got to be careful, because some of these things that I'm saying is not necessarily normal. It can be kind of lead you to a path to outside issues or whatever. When you think about what that means, not having a problem with your problem basically means I don't care what happens to myself. Like I don't think enough of myself to care. And so I've really kind of become mental health focused. Like I really listen to what people are talking about or saying in the meetings, and I don't dare ever want to see somebody else slip through the cracks of having undiagnosed PTSD or an outside issue that they can't get help or resources with. And I understand that I am not qualified to say anything to anybody about their condition or whatever.
Right.
I'm to the point in my life that if I see somebody, struggling in early recovery, that's completely normal. A couple of years in, you're still having a lot of bugaboos and weird thoughts and feelings or whatever. I mean, I feel like shouldn't we be recommending a mental health assessment, in a couple of years if people are still really having issues or whatever, not officially in the meetings, but kind of unofficially, as friends or whatever, because, um, come to find out, the trauma didn't make me an alcoholic. The trauma didn't make me an addict. That was a completely separate issue. The fact that I needed to practice in order to drink again made me an alcoholic.
Mm.
You know, um, the fact that that thought crossed my mind that, man, if I'm going to be any good at this, I'm going to have to practice. And I'll never forget saying that because so I was serious, when I said it, and
Mm-hmm.
um, and one doesn't necessarily lead into the other, but it combined when you combine the two issues, that's what
Well,
leads disorder.
you get a perfect storm. You take the genetic disposition, which first and foremost, is present. Then you throw a trauma into the stew, if you will, and then you throw the access to trying a substance for the first time into the stew, and all of a sudden it you've got a brew going that there's it's just the perfect storm. So yeah, we do have to be real careful, to not make too many suggestions to too many people, in the sense that again, we are still walking sick people. But if you are honestly working a program of recovery and still having some issues and turmoil, then absolutely you should seek, and hopefully you have aligned yourself with a sponsor that will know enough to and have enough experience to say, here's my suggestion to you. Take it, don't take it, but maybe taking one step further to throw in, because there's a lot of my personal friends that have, their program of recovery working with AA, NA, OA, throw an A on there, whatever it is. And they also have therapists, counselors, life coaches, something else to layer, on top of that program of recovery. So yeah, I'm all for it. And the dual diagnosis, I mean, my goodness, the not only the trauma, the PTSD, but the actual physiological changes in the brain to where there is required sometime medication, which is okay, to do and to take in recovery, when done properly. So yeah, I mean, once I just think it's real important to know that those suggestions need to come from experienced, full on in recovery, person that has worked, that is and has worked a program and knows, a little bit more than the person that they're counseling. I think that's super important.
Oh, I agree, and for me, I mean, I have my sponsor that I've worked with since I've been here, a pretty close friend group or whatever that I'm in contact with all the time. And
Mm-hmm.
I have my therapist, I've been with her for over a year or whatever. And the people around me know that, like, this is kind of my big thing is like, man, if we see somebody that we see struggling or whatever, especially we've got a guy in our circle now, 16 years sober, and he's just absolutely about drinking,
Mm-hmm.
and how do we suggest getting him in front of a mental health professional to make sure that there's nothing else going on? You know, um,
Yeah, I
and
don't know.
that's between him and
A lot of people have to find their way. I mean, like I said, I think it. I don't, I don't know. I personally in several groups, here local, and I just think that we try to be really super careful, um, getting out of our lane, if you will.
No, I understand that, and
It's a
that
slippery
nobody
slope.
has said, and I haven't said it either. Because my thing is like I talk about my story. He's heard we're friends. He's heard my story, and if there's things that he identifies with and he wants to talk about
There
that
you
he
go.
needs to bring up or whatever,
Right.
because we're back to the whole attraction rather than promotion thing.
Amen.
Because I am not entitled to promote my agenda in the Fellowship of Alcoholics Anonymous or any other fellowship
Mhm.
for that matter.
Mhm.
Um, it's just it just goes right through me to see others struggling,
Oh, I know it.
and
Yeah, we feel their pain, but I'll tell you what. There's, I heard something in from my sponsor, very early on in recovery, but it had to do with dealing with one of my adult children, and me seeing him going down a certain path, and I'm just like, I can, I need to tell him, and she's like, yeah, no, you don't. If he comes to you and asks you, then obviously you can share. Even he's not one of us, and hopefully he won't be at some point, but that's up to between he and his maker. But if he comes to you, you're welcome to share your experience, strength, and hope. But aside from that, you stay out of God's way. And that was
right,
profound when I heard that, because she said God is working on him just like God was working on you. So had someone stepped in and thrown their opinions, which a lot of most of us have a lot of those, right? And whatnot at you, that could have interfered, what God was trying to do for you. So you stay in your lane, stay out of God's way, and let Him. And when God needs you, He'll call you up, and you'll know that it's time to share. I think that was a very profound that I use all the time with sponsees and with other people in my life. It's like, stay out of God's way. We do not know best. We are the last people who know best. You know, all we have is our
that
experience,
is
strength, and hope.
that's so true. And I was recently having a conversation with an older member of the program or whatever about intuitive thoughts and actions or whatever, and I kind of leaned in real close and I said, "Have you ever felt, compelled like you're just supposed to talk to some random stranger, like you just see somebody and you just
Mm-hmm.
like it's just overwhelming." And she's just grinning at me. She's like, "Yeah," and I'm like, "Okay, so I'm not completely off my bone, completely off my rocker here or whatever." And so one of the things that I've been working with my therapist is, and I think the timing of coming to you in the podcast and everything is um, really no. It's not a coincidence. It's divine simply because I hear you talking about the authenticity, and um, just being real, um, the authentic self, and
Mm-hmm. Without shame.
I don't know. Yeah, yeah, and I was, I haven't had a chance to go through a bunch of the podcasts or whatever, and I listened to yours, and I was dying. I was cracking up because it was, and no offense or whatever, but a lot of the things that you were sharing or whatever was like, I was talking about this last night with somebody else about, I wanted to congratulate you on not having MS or brain tumor, because, you know, this is a super common story. Like, I have no idea. Yeah, I remember standing in the front yard of my mom and dad's house, 13 years old, and I intuitively know that something is horribly wrong,
Yep.
right?
Yep.
And I cannot put my finger on it, right? To save my life, I could not articulate what was wrong. I didn't have the words. I had the instinct to know that something was horribly wrong,
Right.
but I didn't know how to act on it, and I didn't know what to say.
Well, and we're
And
the last ones that we look at. And what you just for those that are listening, what Matt is talking about is the very first episode of Purpose Driven Sobriety. I'm telling my story, and I had gotten to a point which whenever I would try to stop drinking, within 72 hours I would go into seizures. And so I was convinced that I mean, good Lord, don't go to Google. Dr. Google is not your friend. But I was convinced I had a brain tumor, all kinds of different. I was diagnosing myself, and never occurred to me it was the half or three quarters a gallon of vodka I was drinking. Never even occurred to me. It was crazy. The idea that it could actually be something I was doing to myself. That's nuts. Completely nuts. So yeah, I know exactly what you're talking about. I knew something was wrong, but I knew it wasn't me. And that was exactly what was wrong.
Yeah,
Exactly.
you, and we've been here in Indiana now for 2 years, and I've after this last go round or whatever with the relationship with my ex or whatever, I've decided that one, I'm going to take the time to invest in myself and really get to understand and know who I am beyond all these. Because there was a lot of really deep revelations with the past 5 years or whatever about dysfunction and trauma and
Sure.
PTSD and just all this other stuff or whatever. And so I kind of promised myself that I was going to stay single and not pursue another relationship with anybody. Not that anybody's beating down my door anyway, but like I wanted to really kind of heal and recover,
Mm-hmm. Work on
and then
yourself.
explore. Yeah, work on myself. Because the thing of it is, and there was a lot. So moving to Indiana, there was a lot that went with that because you have to understand that house that I sold was the house that my parents arranged for me to be in.
Mm-hmm.
You know what I mean? And then like the will with my dad or whatever, they were going to leave me that house. And I when everything hit the fan and when I decided to move, it was kind of like, okay, I can sit here and write it out, and this will be as good as it gets. And my son, he won't get the services that he needs or whatever,
Mm-hmm.
and this will just be how it how it is. How it is.
Right.
That all became unacceptable to me. I knew that I
Nothing
was never
nothing
gonna know.
changes if nothing changes.
I was never gonna know. I was never gonna know who I was or what I was capable of until I stepped out
Mm-hmm.
from under all of that and went and found out. You know, and so my dad and my sister wasn't a part of my life when I moved, and within the last I don't know year or so or what ago, him and I began talking, and I made my amends to him, and he made amends to me.
Oh, that's good.
Um, and like I was telling you in text, he's been in the hospital for the last 14 days. He's at the end stages of COPD. He's in hospice or whatever. And so, I wanted, there was a part of me that just wanted to sleep today. You
Mm-hmm.
know what I mean? Like just rest and recuperate and all that. And I think it's worth bearing witness to the incredible strength and survivability that we're given. I don't think we often realize how strong we really are.
Mm-hmm.
Um, to live the lives that we've lived, in active addiction or whatever, and then oftentimes in recovery, it's just like, oh my gosh, I'm so tired, I'm so weak, it's getting to me, and the reality of it is we went for days and days and days, not blinking an eye, and I really wanted to make sure that I did come on here and give my message, regardless of what's going on in my life or how I felt about what's going on in my life today. Simply because that next person out there needs to know that no matter what's going on in your life, no matter what you're facing, um, you too can get through it. Um, you don't have to do it alone. You know, Absolutely reach out. Don't be afraid to talk about your life, your story.
Mm-hmm.
Um, there's there's no shame for men, for men and childhood trauma and dysfunction and PTSD. That's all really taboo. The, what I'm finding is, you know, the men will admit they have background, outside issues or whatever,
Mhm.
and privately, people they super trust or whatever. But as a general rule of thumb, what I'm finding, kind of like in the group and just in general with men, is it's still really taboo for us to admit that we had any kind of background issues going on growing up or
Right.
whatever. And that's another one of those sidebar barriers that we absolutely as a society need to smash or whatever, because we take on all this responsibility and stuff, and then until we're whole and healed or whatever, we can't have whole and healed families and relationships.
Right.
um and so
Well, I'm
yeah.
I'm so grateful that you took the time. I know that you're going through that with your dad, and you're certainly and he is certainly in my prayers. It's one of those things too that life is going to keep doing life regardless of whether we're in recovery or not. At least in recovery, we stand a chance to be of service to others, which I personally, with my faith, believe that that's where it's all at. It's not about us. And so I certainly, I know you are, but I'm certainly, I can't get off of here without saying I'm going to encourage you, stay close to your recovery community while you're going through this trauma that, with your dad. And his health, and going into hospice and stuff, stay close to your recovery community, because 100% of the time, 100 without fail, when someone has relapsed, they stop doing what they needed to be doing to be in recovery in the first place. Regardless of what life's doing, life is going to keep doing life, but you have got to stay connected. So, I'm praying for you. I'm grateful that you took the time to come on here and share your story, of experience, strength, and hope. And you will touch someone. And nothing happens in God's world by mistake. We know that. Our book tells us that. But do please stay close to your recovery community while you go through this. I just lost my dad last year, so I'm speaking of full on experience. And the fact is when you can stand back, Matt, and have the gratitude of realizing that you are present and you are helpful to your father during this time, you're going to look back on that and see a strength in yourself that you never knew you had. So yeah, lean into that, lean into your recovery community, and of course lean into God, because he will certainly see you through this.
I already have a sense of gratitude and a sense of um, authenticity about doing all that or whatever,
Good.
simply because um, I've been through that with my mom. And that was the hard one. It took me about 6 months. I mean, I really shut everybody out.
Mm-hmm.
But and I hear what you're saying or whatever. My recovery community and family is first. It means the world to me
Good.
or whatever. Like there's really no isolating or hiding from them, because they all know where I live. They'll beat on
Good.
my door. Like,
you,
yeah, they won't leave me alone.
you can
Uh,
run, but you can't hide.
we do carry-in dinners once a month, and I feed them really well. You
That's
know what I mean? Like
amazing.
I'm always cooking the main dish for them, or sometimes or whatever. Like that's my thing.
That's
It's like
good.
the big meal with
That's
the
good.
family. Well, going back to that, because somebody asked me, it was like, why do you go so overboard? With the carry-in dinners, and I'm like, because you're my family.
It's
I'm gonna
gratitude.
be
It's
like,
gratitude.
you know.
Well,
So yeah, no, there's in order to be there, for him, regardless, and the thing of it is that man wants a beer more than anything in the world right now,
mm,
and I know that. And he's 84 years old. He's living his last days, and I don't have any ill will or any ill feelings about any of it or whatever. I'm perfectly at peace with who he is and what he is and where he's at in
good.
life, because
Good.
I you know you get to a point where some things just don't matter anymore.
Yep,
And,
we're all
you
on
know,
our past. Well, we're coming to the end of our time. I wanted to ask you. So tell me what you would say to the person who is still struggling right now. What's your final words of wisdom, Matt?
don't give up. Do not give up. It's so cliche, don't leave before the miracle happens.
Mm-hmm. Okay. All right.
Listen,
What
listen to these old timers around the table. They know what they're talking
they
about.
do, man. They certainly do. Sometimes they don't have a very good bedside manner, but that getting the message. It's not in necessarily how it's delivered; it's how it's received. So
We often need that.
exactly. Well, we just need that authentic truth that I personally avoided for so long. So, well, Matt, thank you
Sure.
so much for coming on the show. I'm grateful to you. I want to also thank Taylor McGaw again for sponsoring this episode. Taylor McGaw is a realtor here in Waco, Texas. So if you're in the real estate market, please do look her up. Matt, thank you so much, and God bless you and your dad.
Thank you. Bless you too.
All right, take care. Bye bye. Thanks for listening to Purpose Driven Sobriety. Keep coming back.